Hello and congratulations, we've made it through 10 years of Marvel films. Some of them have been amazing, some of them have been completely terrible, but there's no denying it, they have changed the face of the industry and created really a niche of superhero films that didn't exist before. And that journey has step by step brought us towards Avengers: Infinity War, a movie that is almost certainly going to redefine what it is to make money, and, thank the stars, is actually pretty good. Here's my reasons why. A couple of years after Age of Ultron and Civil War, the Avengers have gone their separate ways. Thor is in space, Cap's off being an international fugitive, and Iron Man is just hanging out jogging with Pepper Potts. But all that's about to change, as Thanos, previously operating behind the scenes, is now firmly in the spotlight. He's heading to Earth in search of the Infinity Stones, 6 artifacts that when combined will make him the most powerful creature in existence. And let's just say he's not exactly planning like nice stuff with that power, so it's best that he doesn't have it, is the thrust of the movie. I've been pretty critical of the Marvel films in the past. There are some that I really don't like, there are some that I adore, and there are quite a few in the recent generations in particular that I can't even recall in any great detail. I enjoy the earlier ones more than the later ones, and certainly after Captain America: Winter Soldier, which I think is a great movie, there was just a massive dip in quality for me. It felt like they had moved quite far away from what I really liked about the series, which is like having these strong directorial voices coming through, a really good balance of humour and well choreographed action sequences, and of course all that comic book stuff that I love. When I made a review of Captain America: Civil War saying why I thought it was the worst Marvel movie, I got some slightly unkind comments about that. What I thought was really interesting about that, apart from, the vaguely veiled threats of violence and all the insults about my personal appearance, was people saying like, you don't like comics, you obviously don't understand what comic books should be. And that makes me laugh because I've loved comics since I was a kid. I've loved comics for years and years, ever since I got given some by my grandma as a kid. It was Dark Knight Returns, by the way. She definitely shouldn't have given me that at age 8. I own a huge amount of comics. I've got this lovely version of Arkham Asylum here. I've got this really obscure annual-based thing, which was made by a British publisher in, I think, the 70s or 80s. It's like a Superman-Batman thing that has loads of non-canon stuff in it. I've got a lovely Killing Joke that was given to me by my mum very recently. And I'm a huge fan of Sandman. I think Neil Gaiman's had this kind of iconic run in it. I also like British comics. I've worked a lot with independent comics writers over the course of my early career, if you want to put it like that, for a website called A Place to Hang Your Cape in particular. And my area of research, the thing that I really love in comics, is the 1950s horror comic. This is a great book about that called The 10-Cent Scare by David Hadju. I highly recommend giving that a read if you want to find out more about it. And of course I've read my fair share of DC or Marvel. Now my main love is film, but I love comics and they've been a huge part of my life and the way that I consume media as I grow up. So to some extent the central concept of Avengers: Infinity War really excites me as this kind of 11-year-old boy inside me that says, oh yeah, giant crossover with all these characters. But as a film watcher and as a filmmaker, it just makes me get this cold sweat when I see like 40 plus named characters in the film, especially when they all have a rich and complex backstory, some of which is in the films already, some of which isn't, and which definitely can't all be given justice in one simply 2.5 hour plus film. I guess what I'm saying is I know comics, but I also want films to just be films and to function on that level, as well as, paying homage to stuff that's in a different medium, fundamentally. And that's where the bigger Marvel films in particular have really left me cold. I didn't like Avengers Assemble way back in 2012. I did a review of it really early on this channel, which is not great quality, but I also really didn't like Age of Ultron, which to me felt sloppily executed, low on stakes, and sort of rewarding of really bad character writing. The same can be said of Civil War, as you can see in my video on that. And really we've seen a move to more generic films, I think, from Marvel. Stuff like Doctor Strange is yet another origin story that has a really poorly motivated lead villain who is barely memorable apart from the fact he's played by Mads Mikkelsen. And there's also been a move towards kind of TV-friendly direction. I think the Russo brothers, who made Arrested Development and Community and stuff like that, are actually good directors, and I wouldn't say that they have this kind of TV-friendly style necessarily, but certainly some of the films, like Civil War, really suffered from that, and they weren't that interesting to look at. What I mean more by that is a generic opening sequence to a film like Doctor Strange that has like a shot of a bell in a cloister and then some monks, and then in like 3 or 4 cuts someone gets killed in a library. It doesn't really feel like a self-contained filmic narrative that's going to take like an hour and a half or 2.5 hours, as apparently is the norm now. Instead it feels more like television where you're just watching one episode in an ongoing saga. I know that's kind of the idea of some of the later Marvel films, but also that's made its own problems too. You have this real problem with stakes in the film, where nothing really feels like it changes movie to movie, because of course everything has to be at the status quo, if not by the end of the film, at least by the start of the next film. And we've seen some big changes, like Tony and Pepper being broken up off-screen in Civil War, just suddenly changing, like Pepper and Tony getting back together off-screen for Spider-Man Homecoming. With a lack of stakes, you then have a problem balancing the humour and the comic relief with the action sequences. If the action sequences don't feel weighty enough, the humour or comic relief can feel out of place. And that's also a character problem. You know, there shouldn't just be random quipping from all characters. It should be built out of relationships between the characters and their consistent characterization. So I was really trepidatious going into Infinity War, because it just looks like a mess from the outside, to be honest. I mean, look at this poster. This is just a cropping of this poster. Like, I couldn't possibly fit the whole poster on here. It's Bucky. Do you remember Bucky? That's a raccoon. I mean, who's this big purple thumb up here? What's that all about? I think I saw him at the end of Avengers, but he looked different back then. And look at this, you got Benedict Wong just chilling out in a corner. Does anyone remember Doctor Strange? Because he was in it. He was pretty good too. The one thing that was really keeping me going was I think Marvel had two good films in a row. Black Panther was great, and a pop culture phenomenon in its own right. As far as a blockbuster is concerned, I think Black Panther is a really good example of how to do it. And it has a really singular, unique feel in its art direction, in the way that the story and the directing is told, but it's also made in such a way that it feels consistent with like the tone and the general established facts of the MCU. Likewise with Spider-Man Homecoming. But what I liked most about those films is that they told self-contained stories. They felt like they actually made sense just in and of themselves. And that's what I was really worried about with Infinity War. I'm pleased to say that most of those issues didn't come up. And I think this is a vast improvement on both the previous Avenger films, on Civil War, which is basically an Avengers film, and also I think on the general direction that the MCU has been going. To give you a really good example, I'm also going to have to start talking about spoilery stuff. So if you haven't seen the film yet and you don't want it spoiled for you, then stop watching the video now and then come back and watch the rest of it, because I need that watch time for the ad money, okay? All the shill money from DC has stopped coming through, gang. They ran out. They're paying all the cash on Jason Momoa for Aquaman and his fish buddies, all right? I need that sweet ad cash. Haven't made clickbait this time around, decided not to do it, so definitely need that sweet, sweet ad cash that is just huge money, by the way, just raking it in from this YouTube racket. The opening of the film is an example of how the movie just differs massively from all those issues that I talked about. It starts off with Thor and his buddies hanging out in space, pretty much all dead because Thanos has come and landed on the ship with his mates and they've roughed them all up. This is a good way of setting up the stakes immediately, because we've seen the previous film where these guys were all like hard nuts and they were all really serious fighters, and they worked their way off one planet and then off another one as well, killing a bunch of people along the way. So we know they can really handle themselves. I'm pretty sure that Valkyrie, Tessa Thompson, is like passed out dead in this pile of people. So straight off the bat, you know things are getting serious. And serious is the word, right? Because Ragnarok was quite a funny movie, and so to have all these people like dead, who are essentially in this comedy superhero movie a year before, while this other dude talks about how lucky they are to be dead now as he walks around them, really makes you go, right, okay, gloves are off, gauntlets on. And then to their credit, they then kill off Loki for what looks like real this time. Although of course he's died before, and I'm a comics reader, so I'm pretty used to people dying a lot. Phoenix. Not just that, but then we get the Hulk, who, don't forget, has beaten up both Ultron and Loki in the previous Avengers films, getting smacked around. It's simple, but it's a really good way of showing the audience early on that this isn't going to be like the other films, that there's going to be a much more powerful and serious villain, that there are higher stakes to the movie than there have been before. Watching the next half hour or so of the film is almost like getting a round robin from distant relatives. It's basically like, where are all the Avengers now? And also I guess I didn't realise in my head like how many of them haven't even met each other, so it was nice to just have them hang out and be like, hi, I'm Doctor Strange. Hi, I'm Tony Stark. That's nice to meet you. We both hang out in New York and have goatees. Maybe we should have dinner sometime. Throughout this, there's something kind of soapy, like Days of Our Lives or EastEnders, in the dialogue and in the way that the characters interact with each other. Tony, who's explaining to Bruce Banner, the Hulk, because of course he hasn't really been in New York for like 6 movies, explains it like this. He says, the Avengers broke up. Cap and I fell out hard. We're not on speaking terms. It's not high art, but then again, no one was expecting it to be. What's nice here as well is the way that you can watch the writers chop up these different character pairings and groupings and make them work in interesting or slightly unexpected ways. So for instance, Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy kind of form into 2 different groups, which is good because the tones of Guardians of the Galaxy and Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and then Thor Ragnarok are quite similar, so they work together in a way that maybe like Thor and Doctor Strange might not. And then likewise, you've got Doctor Strange and Iron Man, who are both, you know, pretty similar characters who live in the same place, hanging out, and that's nice to see that sort of thinking around maybe not just about which characters have the best banter, which I think Joss Whedon's script for Avengers was quite often guilty of, but more like what kind of worlds and what tones that these characters usually occupy are going to be best combined together. That overabundance of humour that doesn't always come from the characters but just feels like it's the writers trying to put in gags is still kind of present at this point in the film. There's one really important scene between Star-Lord and Gamora where Gamora is saying, like, please, if Thanos catches me, you have to kill me. It's a really serious character beat that does play in an important way later in the film. And yet we just put in Drax kind of watching them and eating nuts during this scene. It's not really conducive to the plot and the tone that they're telling in this film. And that's not me saying that I need the film to be completely grim. I think there's some good character lines in this film that are really funny. I just think it's important that they come out of the relationships between the characters or the way that the characters speak. So Tony Stark stepping over to Bruce Banner and saying, look, you're embarrassing me in front of the wizard. That's funny, yeah, but it also makes sense, which is a really important thing if you want the characters to feel like they're real and living in a real world. Pretty much the rest of the majority of the movie revolves around 5 separate plot lines where different people are going different places to either get or put away or bring back or prepare for different things. And there's so much going on that it's a little bit hard to build up momentum in any of those individual plot lines sometimes. As they start to come together, it gets a little easier to keep track of. The bigger problem with this is that the plot is so busy just being told that occasionally it bumps into itself. So that scene with Gamora where she has to make clear to Quill that he has to kill her if she's ever in the hands of Thanos would be a lot better in a movie where that was like in the first 20 minutes and then it came up, 40 minutes later. But here you get that scene and then one scene later that comes up again and that's when it pays off. There's not a huge problem with that. You still understand the character motivations and what people are doing and why, but it does make it feel a little less artful, a little less well put together. The thing that really keeps the movie ticking along here is the characterization. It's a big thing that I felt was really lacking in Civil War because a lot of the time the characters were acting in ways that were not only inconsistent within the film, but also inconsistent with the previous films that were in the series. And that's a problem that you're going to have if you're trying to say that all of your films are really closely interlinked and that's the best thing about them, which I hear a lot from fans, and I don't really agree with. The problem with that is that if you are inconsistent between the films, then they don't feel like they are that cohesive. Tony Stark's had a lot of problems with this. In Iron Man 2, he says, I don't want the suit being used for anything by governments, not even as a deterrent. Then in the Avengers, he used a nuclear bomb to try and destroy an entire race of people. Then in Age of Ultron, he decides to build a world-conquering robot. And then when that doesn't work out well, he builds another one. Tony, not very clever for a genius, okay? Not great from you. See me after class. In this film, though, characters feel like they're doing things because they are motivated by the events that we've seen in previous films. That's a really nice way of tying stuff together. I don't need the minutiae, I don't need catchphrases carried over from film to film. I just need a semblance of the events of the previous film to have some sort of echo in this film that I'm watching. A good example is Loki looking like he's going to trick Thor yet again and work for Thanos in the opening sequence of the film, right before he tries to sacrifice himself and then gets murdered for his trouble. That shows a real character arc that has grown from Ragnarok. The real shout out, though, I think, goes to who is arguably the true main character of this film. My worry going into this movie, my biggest worry, was that 40 named characters would make the whole thing messy. And the way that the filmmakers get around that is by focusing on Thanos. He's in a majority of the scenes and his motivations are really well explained. We get flashbacks with him and Gamora. We see him experiencing genuine emotion. Even though he's buried under this giant CGI creation, it's Josh Brolin who carries those scenes and really makes them work. He's almost soft-spoken a lot of the times. He has a huge amount of gravitas and charisma in the performance. And you feel that the character has A, a motivation, and B, a deeply held set of ideals that drive that motivation and drive his interactions with others. The way that he's 9 foot tall and he just dwarfs the rest of the characters, I think that works to be physically imposing. It works for someone like the Hulk. But the thing is, the Hulk doesn't have to speak to people. For most of the movie, Thanos is just having chats with people. He's standing there talking to people. And it makes the blocking really awkward and weird when his hand is the size of your head. The eye lines are off. Everything's a little bit strange about that. And while we're on things that are both big and dumb, why is Peter Dinklage a giant in this film? I don't really like that. I think that's kind of stupid and not cool, I don't think. The effect itself is not that convincing as well. I'm really not driven to like that. And I don't care if it's in the comics. I don't care. Go on, tell me in the comments down below. Tell me I'm wrong. I don't care if it's in the comics. If it's dumb, cut it out of the movie. Why would you keep that in? With Thanos as such a credible threat and with such a believable, I want to say human motivation, and it's set up even better by Gamora's death in the movie, we end up with actual stakes at the ending, which is so rare for a Marvel film. I think that Marvel has a villain problem in like the opposite way that Batman used to have a villain problem. Batman's villain problem was that Batman himself is not as interesting as like the Joker or Two-Face. And I think arguably the best thing about the Dark Knight movies were that they made Batman successfully convincing as a character. They really explained why he was cool and why he was interesting to watch. Marvel's problem has been their villains being too bland, not really having enough motivation. Either they're evil because they're hammy, or they're evil because something bad happened to them, or they're evil because money, I think. Here, we know that Thanos is terrifying, he's very capable, and he very much strongly feels that he ought to get his way. And so when we get to the last couple of fights in the movie, they feel more dynamic and weighty than they do otherwise. And it's not just the writing, it's also the Rousseau brothers choreographing and shooting the scenes in a more interesting way, more like Captain America Winter Soldier's elevator fight than like Captain America Civil War's airport fight, where 8 people run at each other and then split off into little equal pairs so they can fight each other one-on-one. If you look at the fight on Titan, for instance, you have people flying in at all angles, swinging over, chucking stuff on him to hold him down. It's lively, it's vibrant, it's three-dimensional, and it uses all of the different powers that are on display there, which I think is a really important thing that they've missed out on in previous fights. And all of that brings us to the ending. This is something that I was really anticipating because it's the one thing that people have been talking about a lot on Twitter and in their kind of bylines for the reviews. I haven't really looked at any of that stuff in detail, so it was still a surprise to me when Thanos totally won. I've seen a lot of reviewers acting like it is the most unbelievable thing that Marvel would do this, but to me it just seems like a natural conclusion to the movie, which is a good thing, by the way. That's what you want a movie's ending to feel like. M. Night Shyamalan, I'm looking at you, because that's not you, buddy. It speaks a lot, I think, to the cultural moment that we're in, that I could watch a Disney film today that featured a mass genocide of half of the universe's population and think, yeah, that strikes me as a standard way to finish this film at the moment. If there's a really strong thing I want to praise about this film, it's the fact that in those final sequences, I was convinced that either Iron Man or Captain America was going to die. And I think at that point, they've really established stakes that work. They've both done a lot of movies, they've both been in it for quite a long time. Maybe this is it for them. Of course it wasn't. Instead it went to everyone else. It was the Guardians of the Galaxy, it was Black Panther, it was Spider-Man. And sitting there in the cinema, I couldn't help but think of that slate that Kevin Feige or Kevin Figs or KFs was always showing off. Because I know there's going to be another Spider-Man movie. I know that, thinking about how much money and how much cachet they got out of making Black Panther, there's going to be another one of those movies as well. I just can't help but think this is going to be reversed because you killed off all those characters and I know they have other movies going on. So in a way, that ending is indicative of the wider problems of the Marvel universe, even when itself it's a good ending to the film. And I think it is a good ending for the movie. I think it shows what's good about that film and also what's bad about the rest of the MCU. It's a little clumsy, and it's overstuffed and overlong, and it has far too much content and ideas. A lot of what it does, it doesn't capitalize on. It has amazing set pieces that are too far between, but it's a good blockbuster, it makes sense, and it's memorable, which is more than what I can say for most of what the MCU has put out in the last 5 years. So that's it, Infinity War, and I'll see you for my next Marvel review in like a couple of months. Who's asking for that Ant-Man sequel, by the way? Like, who are the massive Ant-Man fans out there? Get in the comments if you're a massive Ant-Man fan and you're like, where was Ant-Man in this movie? Hope you enjoyed the review. If you did, give it a like and click subscribe to get the next one when it comes out, which will probably be in like 2 days, which will be Michael Pearce's Beast. That's it from me. Have a good one. Bye for now.